Hello, lovely Jessie James Beads people. How are you today? I hope you've had a good day so far. For today's, I was going to say this evening, but that's not quite true everywhere, is it? For today's class here on the Jessie James Facebook page, we're going to be working with light academia. And I'm going to show you all of the beads in that beautiful collection in just a minute. We're going to make together a pair of earrings. So it's a really gorgeous blend of antiqued metals and fun and funky beads as well. So what I'd like to do, just while everyone is coming in to join us today, is show you those beads a little bit more closely and the project that we're going to work on together today. So these are the earrings we're going to create. They are quite elongated, however, you could easily switch out the beautiful filigree long drop bead for one of the round beads, which I'll show you in just a moment, to make those just a little bit more diminutive if that is your preference. I've also added 3 beads in the top section of the earring, which again you can just drop that down to 1 or 2 beads if you prefer a slightly smaller style. So what I need to do now is just check in with you and see how everyone is doing. So tell me where you're calling in from today. Tell me what you've been up to, what your plan is for the weekend. And then we'll take a bit of a closer look at some of those beads. If we haven't met before, I'm Jem Hawkes and I'm here with you today for Jessie James Beads. So tell me what you've been up to. Have you had an exciting day? Is the weather being kind to you? It's a bit chilly here at the moment in the UK. As I say, if we haven't met before, I've been working with jewellery for about 12 years now and with wire since around about 2014. It is my first love of jewellery. I do love to work with wire, but my main aim is to bring it to you in a way that people who aren't used to working with wire would have a fair chance of making something that looks very similar to what we're making together. So let's have another quick look down at those earrings and see if people are starting to come in. Elvira is in from Arizona and Keshia is in from Charlotte. Have a beautiful day, whatever it is you're doing. We're in Tucson, says Nicole. Lovely to have your company. Thank you for popping in to see me today. Really appreciate you dropping on by. So let's have a quick look at the earrings that we're going to make together today. There are a couple of different techniques utilised in this project which will be infinitely transferable over, meaning that if you didn't want earrings that are quite this long, you can shorten that up a little bit, and you can also use the techniques for lots and lots of other things. Now, in addition to this absolutely stunning light academia mix, I'm also adding in some 22 gauge round wire. This is the German style, which is a medium temper. I've added in just a few offcuts that I had lying around of chain reaction, and from memory I think it's number 10, but you can use any small lengths of chain that you have available to you. If you wanted to recreate this design, this is the one that we're looking at, which is number 10. And I've also grabbed myself a couple of gold colourway ear wires just up at the top there. So what I'd really love to do is take you through this smashing collection, if I may, so that we can have a closer look at some of the beads that you have access to. So, afternoon Jem from Virginia, good morning from Sherry, and those are beautiful from Nana's Blings and Things. What an absolutely fabulous business name, loving it. Okay, so did I do the sensible thing and open this earlier? I did, which is something of a unique event for me because usually I do not, and then I'm sat here struggling. So we're looking at the Light Academia. I keep wanting to call it Light Macadamia, which is not what it is called. Fabulous, interesting beads indeed. These are fantastic with the mixed media. You've got the brass colourway or the antique colourway, and you've got fabrics to work with as well. That one's alive. So we'll pop those back in the box. If you wanted to size down your earrings, instead of using these, which is what we're going to be working with, absolutely fabulous drop filigree, floral inspired beads, we're going to be working with these. So I'm just going to keep those to one side. You've got lots of choices. I also chose to work with these glorious faceted rondelle shapes. I would call it a misty perhaps a topaz colour, not entirely sure what that's known as. You could switch out the metallic elements for any of the beads you fancy. These are absolutely gorgeous, remind me of the Queen of Hearts. And then you've got these, which are a beautiful, it's a common motif in my own jewellery to have coils and S shapes appearing, so I'm absolutely in love with those. We're also going to be working with a couple of these little beads, which are a fantastic red plus. So it's almost like a burgundy colour with a sheen over the top, which I love. I've also chosen to work with a couple of these fantastic floral bead caps in the most gorgeous metallic colourways. So you could switch around any of the beads you fancy. I'm just going to hold on to these smaller than the other ones, crystal rondelle beads as well, because they work well in the earring design over here. So let me clear the Academia Light mix out of the way, and then we'll see if there are any questions this far. This is so very cool. I saw this described the other day as a steampunk ladybug, which I thought was a really apt description. It's a very, very cool little chap, whichever way you want to think of it. Very, very cute. So let's pop the rest of those beads off to one side so they don't fall all over the shop. Good morning from Maria. I purchased this light mix waiting for it to be delivered, said Nanas. Deborah's in from Wisconsin. Jennifer is in from California. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Maria is in Buena Park. I'm guessing that's California, my loves. Okay, so let's just put up my silly face for a second. I want to show you how very long the earrings are I've designed. Now, I don't have a particularly long neck. I've got a bit of a stubby neck, but I do love wearing elongated designs. So even on a stubby neck, it just sits forwards of the shoulder. Call these shoulder grazers. But you can absolutely change that design up to suit whatever length of earring you like, and they're not so heavy that they would be uncomfortable. Let's pop you back down to the board and talk about our materials. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be working with the round wire in a 22 gauge medium temper, which is the German style, and I've chosen quite a nice shiny gold colour to match in with the antique effect metals that we're working with the Academia Light. I think they're beautiful. Nanas is in Texas, Sandy is in, hello, Jennifer is in, perfection. It's a most fabulous collection, an absolutely glorious collection, and these are some absolutely standout beads as well. Every single one is a winner, as they say. Hello from Sharon in cold upstate New York. Well, welcome to today's live, and hopefully we can warm you up. One of the things I love about using antiqued metals is the look of them change dependent on what colour wire you use with them. Now, I'm a big fan of mixing metals, so you could easily pop silver wire or silver colour wire in with these, and it's going to have a slightly different effect. Pop it with rose gold, and those antique colours look completely different. I've managed to twist that somehow, but never mind, you get the picture. There we go. I love that you've got almost an antique brass to gold colour, and then you've got that much warmer antique copper colour as well. Glorious collection. But you can play around with the wire colours as you see fit. I've added in a couple of bits of chain reaction. Any chain will do, or you don't have to have any at all. I just happen to think it looks lovely. So I'm going to pop one of these out of the way so I don't swat it off the table. And we're going to take a look at our wire. So I've unspooled around about 15 inches. Now, this is far more than we actually need, but it gives you the option to change your mind part of the way through with what you're doing. Now, if you are brand new to working with wire, one thing I would say is that it pays to warm your wire before you use it. Susan is in from NH, I'm not sure where that is, New Hampshire, question mark. Sharon also loves the mixed metals, and Maria says rose gold. Yeah, they all look absolutely fabulous. So many choices. My wire of choice is a hot copper, and I love hot copper because, again, slightly different, slightly harder than a rose gold colourway. The rose gold is a lot softer, and the copper gives it a slightly different look again. So to warm your wire, all I would say is, if you have slippery fingers, you can employ your pliers just to hold on to one end, and then run that wire between thumb and forefinger a couple of times just to warm and smooth it through. Quite often when your wire travels on the spool, it can be in quite cool temperatures, which, believe it or not, does make a difference. And it also can get just a little bit kinked on that reel. Hello, Jem says, Lisa from Albuquerque. That's one of my favourite names ever of a place. It's fabulous. Happy to be with you on my birthday. Oh, happy birthday, Lisa, from everyone at Jessie James. Melanie is in from Florida. I'm jealous. And Susan is saying yes to New Hampshire. So I'm not always au fait with the state abbreviations. So my 15 or so inches of wire has been warmed. And if you missed it, it's 22 gauge. Round gold in the medium temper, which is German style. So once we've warmed that through, what we're going to do, if we're opting to use a segment of chain, and I've got just a couple of small pieces here, you could also use a piece of the chain reaction that has one of the beads in if you prefer. But this is such a cool way of using up those tiny pieces that you may not have another use for. And what we're going to do is just warm at the very end of that wire for a second. Run that through thumb and forefinger to make sure that that is super warm and smooth. And what we're going to do is use our pliers to turn back around about 3/4 of an inch from the end. Now I don't want that to be a hard bend. I want that to be quite a soft bend so that we can access the little loop that's soldered onto the end of that bar in the wire. Now, one thing you will find when you're working with great big long lengths of wire, as this is, it might get on your nerves slightly. So I'm just going to very gently coil that around just a little, not tightly, just a little, so that it doesn't swat the camera with any luck. I mean, it still probably will, but there we go. We can say I tried, can't we? So I'm going to find that loop, pop that over the hook of the wire that we've just created, and I'm just going to close that together by hand to begin with. So we've made quite a soft and sultry little shape down at the bottom, almost like a teardrop gemstone. And I'm going to pinch that firmly in my non-dominant hand, and I'm just going to draw the short tail over to one side. Now you'll see that this is a very soft maneuver. I haven't put any great angle in on this piece, and that's just because I think I like how it looks when it drops down like this. So I'm just going to reorient this so hopefully you can see it as best as possible. And what I'm going to do is grip a hold of the two sections of wire that form the sides of that loop, and I'm just going to hold them without any wires crossing over and start to wrap that small tail around that upright neck that we created together, until I've got a good couple of loops. Now at this stage, if you have sensitive fingertips, if you haven't worked with wire a lot, you may like to use a second pair of pliers to help you finish this little coil of loops around. Don't let the wire hit your pretty face or eyes. Ah, bless you, Teresa. Thank you so much. Hello from Tucson is Linda, and Celia is in from a cold, wet and windy Lancashire. My sister lives in Lancaster, or thereabouts. Hi Jem from NC Mountains. Now I don't know that one. Northern Colorado? I don't know what NC is. I'm so sorry. It sounds like you're all having a lovely day, even if the weather is being a bit of a pest. Now to tuck this tiny little bit of wire away at the end, if you didn't fancy using your fingers, what we can do is use a 2-plier approach. So on one side I'm going to want to hold the loop shape that we've made, and with the other pliers I'm going to try and turn that end around. Now I'm doing this left-handed, which is not my general use, but I want to try and show you more left-handed variations if I can. So for me, normally I would be gripping the form with my non-dominant hand and then using my dominant hand to just take that tail over the end. So I've done that left-handed, which makes it look incredibly weird and difficult. It isn't. I just want to show you occasionally some of the left-handed options. Now I'd like that loop to be centralised beneath those little coils that we're looking at. What I'm going to do occasionally is just flick back between to see if there are any questions as we move through. I don't always get to see them, so do just ask if you need to ask a question, and I'll try and pick it up as and when I can. So we want that end to be as tidy as possible before we add in our next bead. Let me get the second pair of pliers out of the way, and I'm just going to unloop that section that we tidied up for a second. It's a lot of wire to work with, but all it means is that you have options open to you as you move through the design. So I'm going to put these beautiful deep burgundy plus, What colour would you call that? It's almost like it has a mystic coating on one half, which we often see on the translucent beads, not as much on the opaque beads, and I really like it. I really like how that looks. So what I'm going to do is slide that all the way along the long length of the wire so that this now sits right down at the bottom against that coil that we made. Now if you want to make a drop and your head pin just slides straight through the centre of a bead, this is a great way to make a charm whilst using the bead of your choice. So this one has a beautiful large hole through the centre. It's got a large drill aperture through the middle there. If you popped that onto some head pins, it might just slide all the way through. So one of the reasons I wanted to show you the loop design, with or without the chain, to be fair, it will work. You could even add just one section of chain if you preferred. It's just a nice way to add some detail to the bottom of a wire design. Let me just check back to see if we have any questions. We do not at this stage. So the next thing that I'm going to add on, and what I'll do is I'll find the other end of the wire and try to bring it all into the picture. It may not always fit, but we will try and do that. So on top of my red plus or burgundy plus faceted bead, I'm going to add on one of these beautiful antique colour bead caps and just slide that all the way down so that it sits into position. And I love doing this because it reminds me of flower fairies. If you're a lady of a certain age, you may remember those were very, very popular in the 1980s for young children. It reminds me of a flower fairy wearing a cap. So I'm going to choose again to create the same design as I have done on my demonstration piece and add in one of those beautiful floral filigree beads. Obviously the other earring wants to involve itself. Now you could, if you wanted a change, set it like a light bulb if you prefer, or you can set it in the pear drop heavy base down position as I have done in my demonstration piece. So I'm just going to drop that down to the board for a second so you can see how we're building up. You've got a nice little bit of detail down at the bottom, and you've used a bead that perhaps might have otherwise just slid off the end if you were using a head pin. So the next thing that we're going to do is add on our choice of beads up in the top section of the earring. So I went for a transparent crystal in the rondelle shape, and then I went for one of the slightly more, it's not completely opaque, it's almost opaque, in that beautiful topaz colour, and then I went for another one of those small white or transparent crystals. So let's follow that design so that you can see exactly how this piece has been made. Where's that other crystal gone? There it is. So let's pop that one on to the top above the topazzy colour one and slide that all the way down the zip wire until it sits into position. Now what we don't want to do is to make our little wrapped loop up at the top too tight to the bead. So you have two options at this point. The tricky thing to do would be to add on another piece of wire and wrap that around the core that we have going up the centre of that filigree bead. Now the reason I don't want to teach you that is because we're working with very fine wire, it's ever so easy to bend that out of position. So what I'll do at the end of today's tutorial, I'll take two scrap pieces of wire and show you how you can wrap 22 gauge onto 22 gauge. What we're going to do is a little bit of clever guesstimation, a little bit of guessing estimates. I like to call them guesstimations. If you've never heard that term before, you have now. Okay, I cannot see any questions at this stage. Please do ask them if there's anything you need to know. And let's get on with the next step, which is to create a wrapped loop up at the top. So I'm going to pull the wire so that it sits neatly up the centre, and I'm going to add on, gosh, around about ½ an inch. ½ an inch is probably slightly more than we need, so let's bring that down. And if I show you on a ruler, you'll see what it is I mean. I just need to move some wire out of the way. Probably going to be around about 3/8 of an inch. So let's have a look. So there's ½ an inch, 3/8 of an inch. So that's where I'm going to create my next bend. If you wanted to recreate this exactly, And I'm just going to turn that over at a right angle. Doesn't really matter at this stage what orientation that goes in. Because we're working with beautiful, pliable, fine wire, it means we have a few more options open to us that we wouldn't normally be able to work with. So the first thing that I'm going to do is turn a wrapped loop up at the top, and for this I need my very basic, simple round nose pliers. And again, you've got a fair bit of wire to work with, so that's probably going to hit the camera. You likely won't have that issue to worry about. So let's just pop those round nose pliers into position and roll them until we get the first half of that round form. I like to teach creating the round wrapped loop in a two-step direction because I find it much easier to control the shape. You can, once you get used to being a wire wrapper, just take that all the way around in one go. What we're looking for is to have a nice round form up at the top, and if you imagine that the straight line that forms from the core of the earring goes right up the middle, that's where we want that round form to sit. So I'm just going to give that a very gentle, just basically holding it with those pliers. I'm not pressing down in any way, and I'm not pressing where the wires cross over. And what I need to do is just very gently squeeze that a couple of times, very, very small movements with your flat facing pliers. And that's just to set the shape that we're looking to keep here. So what I think I'm going to do is now wrap the long tail 3 times around the core wire up at the top of the design. So if I grip a hold of that round circular form that we've just created, what I'm not doing is pressing incredibly hard. What I am doing is making sure it's a firm grip so that it doesn't slip around. I need to take the tail of wire all the way around that core 3 times. Now, you may like to work with slightly less wire if you're brand new, and then hopefully it will be slightly less daunting. You can see I've made my first wrap, and I'm just going to tighten that up. If I get that wire over sideways, hopefully you'll be able to see. Tighten that up by very gently bringing the coil up to the round form at the top. I'm going to make a second detour all the way around that core and just tighten that coil up again, like so. Grip the round form and take that wire all the way around and across for a 3rd time. So I'm going to very, very gently give a tiny, tiny squeeze here. It's an almost barely there pressure. What I'm going to do now is turn the earring upside down, because although you perhaps wouldn't enjoy wearing the earring in this position, it's certainly easier to show you what I need to do next. So my finer gauge wire is currently sitting on the top of that core wire, and I want to take it around the outside of this beautiful crystal bead, but pass it underneath the core wire. So the journey that the next piece of wire is taking goes around the edge of the bead, but also from the top, whoops, grab the other earring. From the top of that core, it will travel around the side of the bead to underneath that core wire. Hopefully that makes sense. If I turn this sideways and grip a hold of the loop that we've made at the top and the bead itself, I'm going to draw the long tail of wire around and underneath and just get it to sit up against the underside of that core wire. Now when we're working with a heavy gauge wire as the core and we're wrapping with a light wire, it's very easy to do. It's still easy, it just needs a slightly more delicate touch. So what we're going to do now is wrap 3 times around the core wire with a delicate touch. We're going to grip a hold of that bead and the loop up at the top, so I'm using my non-dominant hand here, and I'm going to take the tail of the wire all the way around, and I'm not going to pull it incredibly hard. I'm just going to allow that to circle around all the way until I hit 3 visible wraps. You can go for as many visible wraps as you like. You could even go for a 4th if you prefer. In fact, I think we probably will, because then it will look the same as the one above it. So all the way around, pull that nice and firmly, but not hard. So we're looking to control our wire, but not let it bend this core. Now you can see this is a very bendable wire, but we're doing this in one long length of wire, and in that way we're making our jewellery last longer. Wherever there is a joint in jewellery, you have a slightly weaker point, especially in wire jewellery. So in this piece there is only one joining link, and that's where the ear wire connects to the long drop of the earring. This means that your jewellery, although that core wire is slightly more slender, your jewellery will last a good long time, as long as you don't just stand on it or something daft. So again, the finer gauge wire is coming over the top of that core wire. I'm just going to put a tiny bit of warmth in that next 1.5 inches or so that we can then take the next step, which is to bring that long tail of wire around the edge of the bead and from the top to the underneath of that core wire. So again, I'm going to grip hold of the bead to stop it from moving down at the core. I'm going to draw that all the way around. Now you can see I'm using my nail to guide the wire into position. I've slightly bent the core wire, but I'm not overly stressed by it. So we've now got our 3+ wraps. You can go by distance. You can even have the number of wraps increasing as you go down. So if you felt that that wasn't enough wraps, you could absolutely go for more or less. What you will see is that in adding that extra wrap around the core wire, I've not left myself enough space to do 3 wraps down at the base. Now this isn't a problem. There's enough space for me to do 1 wrap, which is all I need to do. So again, if I pop this on the board sideways, the finer gauge wire is on top of the core, so we're going to get it to wrap around the bead, going from the top to the underside of that core wire. So again, I'm going to push the bead up in this direction so that it sits against our last wrap, and then draw the tail all the way around the core wire until, instead of doing a complete wrap and coming back to this side, I've wrapped it around 1 time and left the tail of wire on the opposite side. Now the reason for this is because I want to do almost like a haloing of the bead. So you can see we've wrapped on this side as we went down from the wrapped loop. So going in the opposite direction, we'll be coming from underneath to on top. So again, little bit of warmth into the tail of wire goes a long way. It really does make all the difference with wire jewellery. The finer gauge wire is currently underneath the core, so we're going to take it around the edge of that bead to on top of the core. So when that swoops around elegantly, you can see I use my finger underneath to keep the bead in position. It's pretty much locked anyway, but it also enables me to make sure that the wire goes exactly where I want it to. So what I'm going to do is see how many wraps I can now fit on this section of core. We're not trying to squish the wire between the preceding coils, we're layering it over the top. Now we've got 2 and a bit visible wraps on this side. I think that is enough. Although we have 3 underneath, 2 on top looks really attractive. So you can allow your jewellery as you make it to dictate to you how this works, and then match that on the second earring if you're going for earrings. This one I might have as a pendant to match the earrings I've already made. The choice is absolutely up to you. So we're going to repeat that same design, warm the wire, grip the bead, draw the long tail around, swoop around that centre, which is building up strength as we go. And you can see that we've got the same number of visible wraps, which is the one that comes in from the side and then 2 complete wraps, the one that comes in from the side and then 2 complete wraps. So warm that tail of wire again, draw it around the bead and then finish off up at the top. So we've got the same number, which is 1 that comes from the side and 2 complete wraps. What I'm going to do is flip the design over. Now we've got quite a tail of wire still available to us. So we started with 15 inches of wire. I'm not worried because I will always find uses for these lengths. 12 inches would have been just about adequate. However, if I had decided that I wanted a much longer drop, or I wanted to put a coil on the top of the design just here, it's always useful to have a little excess rather than not quite enough. So what I'm doing here is making sure that that last piece of wire is as flat to the design as possible, and then when we look at this from the front, it has a really neat design and finish. So I did promise that I was going to show you how to wrap some of the lighter gauge wire onto the wire, but before I do that, I'll show you how to use a traditional ear finding to complete the earring design that we've created together today. So what I like to do when I have a pre-made earring finding, like this beautiful gold colour one here, is I like to give the loop down at the bottom, not the coil that sits on the upright neck section, but just the loop itself. I like to give that a fairly firm squeeze. And what that does is it makes sure that that shape is going to be retained. So give that a squish, and then you can open this exactly like you would a jump ring, which is to bring that loop open. Just make sure that you can see the gap in there. Whoops-a-daisy, almost dropped it. Once you've opened the loop up rather, you need to make sure that it's in your mind which way round that is going to appear. So this is the front of our design, because the wire truncates on the back. There's not much in it. So we need that to be sitting forwards when you're looking at the hook section of the earring. And just to close that up, it's an equal and opposite manoeuvre. So I'm going to grip that very last little bit and close it up. What I will do actually is just make a very quick oversized jump ring. See if I've got some scrap in my pot. I do. Well, this won't be perfectly round if you've never opened or closed a jump ring before. Let's just get that to sit neatly on the board for a second. Let's just make a very quick stunt jump ring in an oversized form. Now, this is hideously shaped. My good friend Fleur works with jump rings all the times, and she would be crying if I said this was a real jump ring. Basically, a jump ring is a circular piece of wire or metal which has a cut. And a jump ring, when you buy them, will be nice and round and nice and strong. To open a jump ring, a lot of people do this. When you do that, you weaken the whole design. When you try to close it back up, it never quite goes back the way you want it to. So if you've never opened and closed a jump ring, let me just reform my stunt jump ring very, very quickly. What we need to do is open like this. So you're drawing one side open, goes like this. One side goes one way, one side goes the other way. And then when you close that back up, you use the opposite motion like so. And it's the same thing down at the bottom of your earrings. So you just need to make sure that you open these in a professional manner, and then they will last for years. It's 22 gauge, nanas. It is 22 gauge we're using today. We went for the round wire in the gold colour, which is a German style medium temper. Now, you absolutely can use 20 gauge to create this. It's a very good idea. However, I wanted to show you how strength can be built with lighter gauge wire. Now, all of these beads have really good drill and access points. What you may find is that certain chains wouldn't go on a 20 gauge. So I've shown you with 22 gauge to give you a few more options as you work through the design. Once you have wound around a couple of times at these junctions between the beads, it just gets to be a little bit stronger. If you don't want to add chain onto the bottom, or you have chain with a much larger loop on it, absolutely go for the 20 gauge. I mean, I often make earrings with 18 gauge anyway, because I use 18 gauge for literally everything. So what I wanted to show you before I go is how to add on if you decided that you wanted to use shorter lengths of wire. So let's imagine then that we have, tell you what, I'm going to just create a little coil down at the bottom. Very, very poor coil that I'm making very, very quickly, because I just want to show you a simple technique which is an alternative to the one that we've looked at together today. So this is the world's most awful coil that I've made down at the bottom, but hopefully it's enough just to stop the bead from sliding off the bottom. So let's say that we're working with a shorter length of wire to make our life easier, and let's pretend that we've made an extra little bit of chain and the bead cap section down at the bottom. Pop the wire all the way up through. So before we add on our next beads, what we need to do is wind on a small amount of 22 gauge wire. Now when you're winding 22 onto 22, it's a little bit tricky and it takes a little bit of practice. However, it is achievable. So if you wanted to work with shorter lengths of wire, that's entirely possible. So what we're going to do is just strengthen the main section where that winding on will happen. So I like to get it nice and warm and smooth first, like so. Thank you very much for your kind feedback, Rhonda. That's very sweet of you. So it's nice and warm and smooth, which means it's pliable. What I'm going to do is add a little bit of strength. Now, I don't want to change the shape of the wire. I'm not trying to flatten it from being round into oval or square or anything else. I'm opening and closing my pliers just an inch above where the filigree drop shaped bead sits. Now this sounds noisy and there's a reason for that. It's opening and closing, which adds the strength to that wire. And if I just twang the end of this wire, you can see that it has a little more residual strength to it now. And it's something to do with exciting the electrons in the metal to make them bond more closely. I can't pretend to fully understand the science behind it, I just know that it works. So what I need now is a very soft section of the same 22 gauge wire. And we're getting that lovely and warm and smooth. That's about 6 times between thumb and forefinger. Now there will be a small amount of wastage with this, because what I want to do is I've put the add-on wire underneath the core wire. And there's a tail of about 1/2 inch on the end, and we may lose some of this. So I'm going to push up with my non-dominant forefinger and draw the tail of wire around. You need to be pinching very firmly with the non-dominant side to get this to work. It is, like I said, a little bit tricky and you may have a little bit of wastage, but you can add that on if you prefer. So you can see that the coils are a little bit wild, so we're going to tidy up those 2 coils. Might pay actually to trim away the excess first. Make sure that you're cutting the correct piece of wire, not the bit that you want to keep, because that would be annoying. Once you've got that tail cut away, we're just going to squish up those tiny, tiny coils together and tidy that cut end so that it sits down neatly against that core wire. Now you will see a little bit of bending on the wire, but you can indeed add on to the piece if you wanted to work with 2 shorter lengths of wire, if you found working with the great big long lengths a bit too much. So I'm going to add in the first of those beads in exactly the same way as we did. And I'm just going to recap very, very briefly. My finer gauge, the add-on wire is over the top of our core wire. And we want it to skirt around one side of that bead. So I'm going to pull that now underneath the core wire. And then we're going to wrap that around the centre. It's another technique if you prefer. When you're wrapping from the base to the top, you don't have to estimate how much space you need. Let's just pop the next bead in. From the top of the core wire, around the outside of that added bead, to underneath the core wire. And I'm just going to wrap this very quickly a couple of times around that core. My nail has indeed smashed today, so sorry if that's a little bit unattractive. I dropped a large box on it, which is par for the course when you're me. So bring that last bead down into position. I'm going to grip the new bead. The add-on wire is coming from the top of the core wire around the outside of that bead to underneath the core wire. And then we're going to wrap just once at the top. What you can then do is add in your wrapped loop exactly the same way as we did on the demonstration piece before returning back in the opposite direction. Now I'm going to show you this at light speed. So we're starting from underneath the core wire, so we need to go over the top. So that's around the outside of the bead, wrap, wrap and around, wrap, wrap and around. When we get down to the bottom, we just do a couple of wraps and then cut away at the back. So it can be incredibly fast to make up. It can really go very, very quickly. And what you would need to do then is just trim away the wire as close to the end as you possibly can before you tuck that last little tail away. So obviously it was a very ugly coil that I made at the base of this one, but it was just to use as a bead stopper. However, you've got there 2 techniques. With the technique of using one great big long length of wire, the difference being is you have to estimate the gap between the wrapped loop and coming back to the top of that filigree bead, which you may not be comfortable with doing. However, it's much easier to work with a single long length of wire because you don't have to go through the trauma of adding wire on. So you've got 2 different techniques to achieve the same main function. Just another wrapped loop at the top, and obviously we short-handed this bit down at the bottom. We didn't make the same thing again. So let's bring the pair of earrings in so that you can see what they look like one last time. Always a dog hair on my workbench, which I don't mind because my dogs are lovely. So there's the little bit of chain reaction down at the bottom. If you missed what we were using earlier, I have an ingredients list for you. 22 gauge round medium temper German style wire, and that's in the gold colour. I also added in some offcuts from a chain reaction. If you wanted to use this one, it's number 10, 6464 is the code for that one. And the mainstay of today's tutorial is the absolutely fabulous Light Academia. And the more I think about it, the more I want to say macadamia. And I don't really know why that is. It's just me. So let's pop you back up to here for a second. And let's see if I can find what these look like in the ear. I haven't worn any earrings for a couple of weeks, so it might not go. There we go, that's fine. So that is obviously quite a long drop earring for this design. In case you missed it at the top of the show today, what you can do is change out whether you're going to use the beautiful big filigree floral inspired drop. You could change that up for any of the beads. You could use much smaller beads. That is, again, as I say, quite a long drop that we've made together. You don't have to have chain on the bottom. You don't have to have the two compartments. You can just wrap the individual wires if you prefer. So there's lots of different things that you can do with the techniques we've looked at today. What breed of dogs? The first, so the dogs, we have one which is a Jack Russell. And he's Mojo, and he's a terror, and he's molting at the moment because we had fake spring and we're about to go back into winter, so that's fun. The other dog is a Jack Russell, which is what we were told when we rescued him. There's not very much Jack Russell in him. He's mostly border collie even, crossed with Springer Spaniel, crossed with maybe a tiny bit of Pomeranian, because his tail is absolutely Billy Bonkers mad. It's crazy. They're both beautiful. So Joey is my unicorn dog, because nobody can really ever identify what he is, and Mojo is my Jack Russell. Nana says that first technique seems much easier with one wire for me. Yep, so with the one wire technique, we allowed 3/8 of an inch between the top of that gorgeous filigree, I want to say bronzy colour bead, but I could be wrong, and where we made the angle to create that wrapped loop. So rather than guessing, you could use that as a measurement, and that will work if you're using the 22 gauge wire. If it doesn't fit evenly, just try to copy it on the second earring and say, I did that on purpose, which is a lot of what we do as wire workers. Linda says, great class as always, you're always so thorough and explain everything so well. Thank you so much. They look beautiful on you. That's really, really kind. Like I said earlier, I am not built with elegance in mind. I am built with sturdiness in mind. So I have quite a short, diminutive neck, but I like a long drop earring anyway, and I encourage people to wear what makes them feel beautiful and glamorous and not be dictated to by some book of, oh, you must wear this if you're that. Just do your thing, have your style and own it. Rhonda says, I love how the long drop and how they elongate the neck, very flattering. Maybe I should wear 20 of them and then I will look glamorous, elegant and swan-necked. Who can possibly say? It has been my absolute pleasure to be with you here today on the Jessie James Beads Facebook page. I hope to be back with you again next Saturday for more madness, chatter, beads pinging into infinity, me hitting the camera, all kinds of wonderful things. So I hope that you'll join me again next Saturday. Its usual time is midday Eastern Standard. You guys all understand your time zone, so you'll know what time you are in your local zone. I'll catch up with the comments after the show, and if there's anything you need any help with, anything that you need further explanation on, drop me a tag down in the comments and I'll endeavour to catch up with them just as soon as I possibly can. Huge, massive love to you all from me, my household and my beautiful fluffy dogs, and I'll see you in a week's time. Take care. Bye.